This plant is called the croting... Oh no. Oh no. This plant is called the Crotalaria cunninghamii. I'm sure I pronounced that correctly. What does it look like to you? I'll give you a second to write it down in the comments down below. Just kidding. You don't get a second to write it down in the comments below because every single one of you just thought the exact same thing in your tiny, mushy little brains. And that is that this plant looks like a bird. That's why it's also called the green bird flower, because it's green and it looks like a bird. I'm too sassy. Am I too sassy for this? Why do we all look at this flower and see the exact same thing in our tiny, cute, mushy little brains? Well, that's because our brains are wired to see patterns. That's why we see a face in the moon, we see a badass fucking sick-ass wolf in this cloud, and we see Jesus Christ in this pierogi. I knew he said he'd be back, but I didn't think it would be like this. Our brains seek patterns as a way to kind of shortcut its way to an approximation of the truth. Evolutionarily, this is advantageous to quickly assess a situation for what is probably true, rather than to rigorously pursue the facts needed to find a definitive truth. For example, imagine two Stone Age hunters trekking through the forest. They're hunting caribou or something like that, following hoof marks in the snow. As they go, they see claw marks on a tree and some big old dookie on the ground, signs that there's probably a bear nearby. Then suddenly they both hear a roar and a branch breaking. One hunter, who is adept at seeking patterns, thinks, uh-oh, sounds like something might be sneaking up on us. And we saw evidence of a bear earlier. It might be a bear. And so he books it out of there. The second hunter, who cares a lot about facts and logic, thinks, uh-oh, sounds like something might be sneaking up on us. We saw some evidence of a bear earlier, but we were also following caribou tracks. And a bear roar and a caribou, they don't sound that different. Roll the tape. So we really can't commit to one or the other based on the present evidence. So he goes to look behind the bush, and that friggin' nerd gets his ass eaten by a bear. And not in a good way. The first hunter recognized a pattern. Claw marks, dookie, a bear roar, and determined that means there's probably a bear nearby. In life or death, fight or flight scenarios, probably is good enough. The second hunter pursued definitive truth. He wanted to take a holistic view of the evidence they had, not just the evidence that confirmed their initial conclusion, which is great for doing science or a trial or creating policy, moments where you have time to sit back and reflect on all the possibilities, not when you might get eaten by a bear. And that's all natural selection cares about. Well, that's not all natural selection cares about, but it's mostly what natural selection cares about. If a certain decision-making process is preferable in those life or death scenarios, that's what's going to prevail evolutionarily. That's how we ended up with these freaking monkey brains that run with the first conclusion that we come to. That leaf looks like a wing. That leaf looks like a beak. That shit right there is a bird, bro. I know what a bird looks like. They can't hide the truth from us anymore, bro. Did you like that transition? I don't think it was jarring. Do you think it was jarring? I don't think it was jarring. You know what this video is about. You read the title. Don't even joke yourself. Don't even kid yourself. You know why we're here. This video isn't about debunking every conspiracy theory using facts and logic. The problem with debunking conspiracy theories broadly is that some of those ding-dang things, maybe, hey, some of those things, I don't know, I'm just saying. Some of those things might be true. Hey, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, I'm just saying. So I'm not here to debunk all of them and say every conspiracy theory is wrong. I'm here to debunk the thought process that a lot of conspiracy theories rely on to convince you that they're true. And that thought process is the aforementioned pattern seeking. Conspiracy theories typically rely on cherry-picked data that creates a pattern that's easy for our ape brains to latch onto. As an example, a classic. If for some reason you're not familiar with what this is referring to, you don't need to watch this video. You've got better ways to spend your iPad time, all right? You could be playing Fortnite right now, but I'll explain it anyway. This is referring to the conspiracy theory that the United States government or Israel or the New World Order or the globalists are responsible for the Twin Towers falling on September 11th, 2001, usually theorized to be through internal detonation. This is based on the idea from the official narrative straight out of George W.'s mouth that after the planes hit the towers, the jet fuel in the planes had ignited and caused the structural steel beams within the tower to heat up, which then caused the towers to fall after the planes had already hit them. Jet fuel burns at about 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, while steel beams wouldn't melt until roughly 2700 degrees Fahrenheit, which is less for those of you keeping count at home. So how did the steel beams melt if jet fuel can't burn hot enough to melt them? What, dude? What? What the fuck, dude? Before I tell you why this isn't good evidence of anything, really, let's first establish the pattern that this conspiracy is trying to present you with. Number one, if jet fuel can't melt steel beams, then the official narrative must not be true. Number two, if the official narrative isn't true, then they must be lying about it. Number three, if they lied about it, then they must be the ones who did it. And that's the pattern. And the reason I'm calling this a pattern is because this kind of does make sense at first glance, right? It's not like these conclusions are completely nonsensical. You can see how one can lead to the other. But none of these conclusions necessarily follow one another. If we put on our logic hats for a second, let's start with the second point and circle back. If the official narrative isn't true, does that necessarily mean that the government is lying? No. They could just be wrong. The official narrative being false doesn't necessarily mean that the government is lying, but that conclusion is jumped to because it kind of seems like that could be right given the premise. Then the next point, if the government is lying, then they must be behind it. Well, that's also not really true, is it? They could be lying because aliens did it, right? And they're trying to hide the fact that aliens exist. These are just patterns that kind of gesture towards a potential truth, not actually evidence of anything definitive. Just like the hunters hearing a branch break. But our brains like that. We can kind of fill in the blanks and jump to our own conclusions. And that's fine if you just don't want to get eaten by a bear. But if you actually want to know the truth, those shortcuts aren't going to cut it. But what about the first point that we skipped? If jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, then the official narrative must be false. Well, again, this kind of makes sense at face value, but if you do even a little bit of research, the theory falls apart. While jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to turn steel beams to liquid, that's not necessarily needed for the structural integrity of the towers to be lessened to a degree that they would collapse. If you've ever seen a blacksmith working on tools, you know that as metal heats up, it becomes more malleable. The sword isn't at melting point, but it clearly isn't as sturdy as it was before it was heated up. So the steel beams don't actually need to reach their melting point in order for the towers to fall. They just need to get hot enough to get all bendy and floppy. Or at least a little bit bendy and floppy. There isn't a specific temperature that the steel beams would have needed to reach in order to become malleable, because they just become more malleable the hotter they get. But it's reasonable to conclude, given the amount of weight the steel beams were holding up, that the steel beams could reach a much lower temperature and weaken enough for the towers to fall. To once again reiterate, I'm not trying to completely debunk this conspiracy theory. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a physicist. I would encourage you to go find someone much more qualified than me to thoroughly debunk this conspiracy. However, what I want to show you is that this conspiracy theory and the pattern that it presents doesn't even consider this possibility. The bedrock of this theory hinges on the fact that the steel beams need to reach melting point in order for the towers to fall. But even just a layman's understanding of how metal works shows that that's not true. Yet jet fuel can't melt steel beams has become this signifier of skepticism and conspiratorial thinking. Now, going back to our pattern, the entire thought process, which was already logically flawed, now completely falls apart if we know that jet fuel can weaken steel beams. And so now it's completely reasonable to think that the official narrative is true, and so the rest of the pattern falls apart. You can apply this kind of thinking to almost any conspiracy theory out there. They point to a few pieces of evidence that kind of suggest toward their desired conclusion, and they hope that you won't dig into it any further from there. Often the evidence doesn't even really fit together. This is where the just asking question defense comes from. Point to as many weird things as you can and let the audience fill in the blanks. And we will, because our monkey brains love to do that. Obviously, the 9/11 conspiracies started around 2001, but they were mostly a niche belief that, like, your weird stoner friend believed or something like that. But today, 41% of Republicans believe in this conspiracy. Hell, the president himself is a conspiracy theorist. So what changed? Let's take a look at another plant, the bee orchid. I'm spoiling it for you this time by giving you the common name, but the bee orchid is named as such because its petals look like a bee. Specifically, it looks like a female bee. Apparently, I don't know what a female bee looks like, but male bees do. So basically, male bees see this plant, they recognize some patterns that kind of look like a female bee, and they get so unbelievably horny that they're forced to land on the flower. By the time the bee realizes that it's not a female bee, do bees realize things? I don't know if bees have the capacity to realize things. Well, regardless, whether the bee knows it or not, by the time it's done rubbing all up against its petals, it's already pollinated the plant. That's why natural selection has selected for petals that look like a bee, but the bee hasn't selected against this pattern-seeking behavior because it doesn't really harm the bee. But the pattern-seeking behavior does make reproduction easier when the bee locks its eyes on a real live, sexy female bee. But it's important to recognize something, and that is that the bee orchid doesn't know that it looks like a bee, right? It doesn't know anything. It's a plant. It never decided, oh, if I shape my petals to look like a bee, then a bee will land on me and pollinate me. It just gradually changed over generations, and the orchids whose petals resembled the patterns of bees were more likely to reproduce. Over time, we get to the point where the petals really do look like a bee, even to the human eye. The orchid has no idea what bees look like or even what bees are. It just knows that it wants to get pollinated. What does any of this have to do with conspiracy theories? You're probably wondering at this point. Well, on the internet, we are the bees, and the algorithm is the orchid. We hear a lot about the algorithm, especially on YouTube and TikTok. Oh, the algorithm likes this and doesn't like this. But what is the algorithm? What does it do. All the algorithm does is it determines what you're shown next. That's it. If you're scrolling on TikTok, the next video that you see is determined by an algorithm. If you're watching this video on YouTube, you're seeing a list of videos on the side, or as you scroll down, of videos that the algorithm has selected to show you. If you're scrolling on Facebook or Instagram, you might see posts from people that you decided to follow, but you're probably seeing just as many, if not more, posts from people that the algorithm just decided to show you. Just like the orchid doesn't know what a bee looks like, the algorithm doesn't know what it's showing you. Just like how the orchid just knows that it wants to be pollinated, the algorithm just knows that it wants you to engage with whatever it shows you. If it's the YouTube algorithm, it wants you to click on the video and watch the entire thing. It wants you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below about how you feel about the algorithm. It really helps the channel out. Thanks. And since the algorithm only cares about engagement, it's going to show you whatever you engage with the most. It really isn't that mysterious. People will talk about the whims of the algorithm, and it's true that the companies behind these algorithms might push it one way or another, but they can't make you engage with the content. It's similar to natural selection and the orchid. The orchid is just following the bee's lead. The orchid is presenting a specific pattern, and the bee is engaging with that pattern. If Google or Meta wants to push a specific kind of content, they can, but they can't force you to engage with it. And so if you're not engaging with it, you're either going to stop using the platform because you're not interested in what it's showing you, or they're going to stop showing that kind of content. That's why conspiracy theories have only become more popular as the internet has become the primary source of information for the average person. The algorithm pushes conspiracy theories because they're based on the minimal amount of easily digestible information, like jet fuel can't melt steel beams. We engage with that content because it massages our little ape brains in just the right way, presents us a pattern so we can jump to our own conclusions, and that then reinforces the algorithm to continue showing us that kind of content. And once the algorithm knows you engage with that kind of content, it's never going to show you anything that contradicts it, because you'll be less likely to engage with that due to confirmation bias. It's this cycle that continues to reinforce conspiracy content over a broad, holistic view of evidence. And there's not really a whole lot we can do about it. Well, there's not really much we can do about it for other people, but you and me, we're different. We're not like the rest of the sheep out there that just takes in whatever slop the algorithm forces into our eye holes, right? We're different. We can see the truth. So what we can do is actually do our own research. Sometimes it can be as simple as whenever you're reading or listening to something about a conspiracy and you're thinking, oh, you know what? This actually, it kind of makes sense. Just go into Google and type, X conspiracy theory debunked, and read what the other side has to say about it. Learn the counter arguments and then go back to whatever conspiracy theorists you were learning about and see what they have to say about those counter arguments. And if their argument against it is something like, oh, well, they're just lying to conceal the truth, well, then you can probably just discount that conspiracy theory entirely. Just give everything the algorithm throws at you a second thought. That's really all I'm asking. Wowzers. Isn't it crazy that you got such a legendary algorithm pull as this video? You're something else. You're built different. You're just the coolest to ever do it. For real. Do yourself a favor. Let the algorithm know that you engaged with this content. Give a like. Give a subscribe. Come on, leave a comment. You're just so cool, man. Let them know that you want to see content like this, not like what the rest of the sheep out there are seeing. And leave a comment about what conspiracy theories that you actually believe in after doing your own research, of course. I want to make more videos about conspiracy theories, and I kind of want to see just kind of where people are at with all of them. I was thinking about making a video about like a guide to conspiracies and like determining which ones are worth your time and which ones are just total bullshit, right? If I did do that, I'd probably start with like the whole Epstein stuff because I think that might be the most believed conspiracy theory right now. Like it seems like everybody's kind of in on that, so I'd probably start with that one. But let me know any other conspiracies that like you actually believe in. Also, let me know if you'd watch me stream. I was thinking about streaming, but I kind of want to build up an audience. I don't want to stream to 0 people because that sounds lame. If I did, it'd probably be like talking about conspiracies or talking about politics or, whatever. Watch my other videos. Also, I have a couple of other videos on this channel that you could watch if you haven't watched them already. And I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say. I love you. God, you're just beautiful. Thank you. I love you. Goodbye. I don't feel drunk at all. It's like my anxiety and self-consciousness of knowing that I'm on camera is counteracting the alcohol. Probably. I should go drive.